but I'm also happy to have these folks. Vince Ferrara right there, Will West right here, Ryan Callahan, Paige Dower. Thanks to you all. And if you're wondering, who are these people? Just check the little graphic under them. It'll tell you who they are. All right. Because we don't have time. We're too jam-packed. 4-0 Tennessee was off yesterday, but there were 6 other games involving SEC teams. We could put that up. There we go. Texas, Mississippi State hung with them a little longer than I thought they would. Then the nightcap last night was unreal. For those who didn't get a chance to see it, it looked like it was just going to be a blowout. Alabama was up, 28-0 at one point and 30-3 at the half. And then Georgia comes back, takes the lead for one play. And then Alabama comes back with a bomb to win the thing. Wow, the genius, Lane Kiffin, plays one good team this year and already falls in his face. There's a shocker. Kentucky beats Ole Miss. And then we got LSU whipping up on South Alabama. Oklahoma goes down to Auburn. And they had to have a fourth quarter comeback. And with their offense, I wouldn't have pictured it. So it's a good thing the defense got it done for them, even scoring for them. And then Texas A&M beats Tennessee's next opponent, Arkansas. Okay, Ryan, I'll start with you. What did we learn? We're just going to talk a little SEC. Tennessee didn't play, so let's catch up on what's going on. What have we learned from the SEC yesterday?
Let's start with the headliners. I think we learned that Georgia and Alabama are the class of the SEC until further notice, and that hasn't changed, despite people assuming that Alabama might take a half step back. Boy, they have not. So I think we're reminded how much talent is still on that roster. Jalen Milroe looks better than he did last year. We'll see if that continues in the long run. He can be a little up and down, but Georgia and Alabama look awfully good, and that looked like 2 potential national championship teams, or at least teams that have a real shot at winning one, playing head-to-head last night. So I start with that because that's always a little bit of a downer if you're a Tennessee fan and you see those 2 teams playing that well.
I think everybody had a hope that Alabama might drop off this year, but there's an awful lot of talent there. Paige, what did you learn yesterday?
Yeah, kind of the same thing that you were saying. I even think if you kind of switch gears too and you go over to the Texas game, I think Arch Manning continues to look very elite, very legit. That offense really kind of finding its rhythm. Texas A&M, they looked pretty good against Arkansas's, offensive line. But again, I just think the SEC is just giving us quality, entertaining games, especially if you could be like a third party watching the game. Even Oklahoma and Auburn had some flashes too.
What did we learn, guys?
Kalen DeBoer is good. He is really good, and there is no drop-off. This is what happens when you give one of these elite offensive minds the kind of talent that Nick Saban can bring into a program. It's incredible when you see what Alabama was capable of doing. Now, at the same time, he's got to learn a lesson. This isn't the Pac-12. Don't let your foot off the gas and start working on things and go vanilla against Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going against Oklahoma, who's got no offense, like Josh Heupel did, that makes sense to me.
It does. It does.
Against Georgia, that's a little risky.
You stop disguising blitzes. You stop blitzing. You start working on different offensive sets instead of just keeping your foot on the gas and going tempo and crushing them. He has to learn that lesson. Maybe he did last night. The other thing is, maybe right now in the SEC, because of the transfer portal, this is going to look a little bit like the early part of the NFL season, where we could see a team that has not gelled yet. They brought in transfer players like Kentucky. And sometimes week 1 through 3 in the NFL, you can't really tell who's good and who isn't. Don't overreact to that. Right. We might have to say that in the SEC because Kentucky looked like they can't block against South Carolina. They wouldn't throw the football and then just blow Ole Miss off the ball.
Yeah, along the same lines as part of what I was going to say, when you play a team really is going to matter this year because teams are going to need to come together and change and evolve as the season goes on. I also think even though Alabama looked really good, Georgia looked really good in their own respective halves, and then Alabama made the play at the end, I think you can come out of that game and say, all right, they've got some flaws, Texas got some flaws. Wait, maybe Tennessee has some flaws. This is a thin line between continuing your expectations and what the reality of a week-to-week in this league is.
My lesson was this, and you guys can disagree if you like. Anybody can beat anybody.
Yeah.
Kentucky going to Ole Miss. You already hit the other one. Kentucky opened the season by getting crushed at home by South Carolina. Then they hang with Georgia. Then they go to Ole Miss and shut down an offense that everybody says, oh, you can't shut down Jackson Dart and Lane Kiffin. To me, that is a wake-up call for all fans out there who are sitting there, and we do it in the media. Okay, they'll beat this team, they'll lose to that team, they'll beat this team. We have no idea, none. We might have a guess, we might be an educated guess, but when they kick that thing off, it's anybody's game. Going back to as if South Carolina 2 years ago wasn't a good enough lesson, you look at Kentucky and Ole Miss. Kentucky with that horrible offense, horrible quarterback play, one hope to hell pass at the end of the game, all of a sudden they're in the end zone. It's like, wait a second. How are they going to pull this off? And you're waiting for them to choke and die. To me, I'm just watching that thinking, I hope Tennessee fans are paying attention. Because if you're sitting there not taking Arkansas seriously, not taking Florida seriously, who always gives you fits, not taking whoever seriously, you need to start taking these teams seriously. In this league, anybody can beat anybody.
People laughed at me this week because I said if Tennessee is conservative, if what they were against NC State and Oklahoma is who Tennessee is, they're going to struggle against Kentucky. Because you're walking into Mark Stoops going to play him playing his game.
Right.
That's the issue Mark Stoops always has with Josh Heupel, and why I just always will put that in ink as a win for Heupel, is you can't go throw the ball 40 times a game when that's not what you do against a Josh Heupel team and go tempo and expect to beat them. You can't throw the ball 20 times, run it 50 times, and expect to beat Kentucky easily.
And I think what we've seen up until this point, too, that aggressive play calling pays off. When Kentucky got a little shy and conservative against Georgia, not going for it on fourth down, that ended up costing them. They had quality fourth down conversions against Ole Miss. That proved to be the difference maker. Alabama lets up in the second half. Here comes Georgia coming back. So I think what's the key here is the best games have the aggressive play calling, and I think that's how you end up causing separation, because the top five, the top tier in the SEC, they are so razor thin, so close to each other that you need those aggressive play calls.
And I think it's just another reminder. We do it all the time. We do it. Fans certainly do it. We hear from them. Well, if Arkansas could barely beat Auburn, like we're going to crush them.
Transitive property.
Right. You
doesn't
can't
work,
just look at one result and make grand declarations from it. It's not the reality of college football right
Well,
now.
the situation plays such a role in it. I mean, here's the thing, not to take anything away from what Alabama did last night. They were home underdogs. Let's say that game was in Athens. We get the same score? I don't think so. It doesn't mean I think Georgia wins. I just don't think you see that kind of a start from Alabama. If they're going to Athens, I don't think they're rolling to a 28-0 lead. It's where you're playing. I think they were really helped by the fact they're home underdogs. Those kind of things play a role in it, and I think fans need to pay attention because it can bite you in the butt. I also think, Ryan, the NFL, we look at it and it's like the talent is so equal at that league where if you take one or two players off this team, put them on the other team wins. I mean, it's that razor thin. Switch Trevor Lawrence and Patrick Mahomes. I'm putting my money on the Jaguars if they play the Chiefs, just because of one guy. When you look at the SEC now, where all the talent, and you cover it, we're going to talk recruiting with you later, all the talent's gathered down here, tons of it. Is it getting that way in the SEC, or am I overblowing it? I just think you're closer to the NFL than you are in any other conference.
It's getting that way, and this is what if you remember when we discussed NIL a few years ago, I thought it was trending this way, that it was going to be on a small scale what the NFL is, where 25 teams are good enough to compete for a championship, and it was 10 or 12 maybe just a few years ago. So I think we're already seeing a little bit of that. It's going to get even more that way though, I think. And to your point, I think the top tier is still a little separated. That doesn't mean upsets don't happen. Yeah. The top 4 or so look better than the rest, but between 5 and 14 in this league, it's very even. And one player being out can swing a game. So those injury reports each week, they really matter now.
They matter now, yeah. And I think that, you're right. Some of those look like they're separating, but before yesterday, I think most people would have had Ole Miss in that separate group, and they lose to Kentucky. Missouri isn't as good as I think a lot of people expected coming in. Some of us said we expected them to drop back. Their schedule's so bad they may keep a good record. But they have to go to overtime to beat Vanderbilt. So if you're sitting there, well, the bottom can't beat the top. They can take them to overtime. So I think what I've learned so far is get ready for the chaos. I don't think this is going to go to chalk this year. I think you're going to see a lot of teams beating each other up. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. We've had this discussion since the summer because you think the cream's going to rise and get into the playoffs.
I think just a bunch of 10-2 teams is what you're going to end up with. That's my concern for the SEC. And then how does the playoff committee decide who's going to the playoff from the SEC?
And I agree. If you're saying there's a bunch of 10-2 teams, I don't know that I completely disagree at this point. But I don't think you're going to have like 12-0 teams.
Yeah.
There are people like, well, they'll only lose one game. Well, nobody's going to beat Texas. I think all these teams could walk around with 2 losses by year's end. I think they're going to beat each other up, but we'll see.
You can't write people off with one loss.
Right. Not anymore.
And so teams will bounce back from a loss.
Now, on an interesting point, I will say this. The Ole Miss situation, we got to get a break, but the Ole Miss situation is interesting because their SEC schedule, on paper, it doesn't look tough, and they played absolutely trash going into their conference schedule, their non-conference. If they lose 2 games, I don't know that they're getting in with their schedule strength. They may have to run the table from here on out.
But teams like LSU and A&M, maybe they're still in the conversation even though they took early losses.
But they played tougher teams early that may count them. Yeah, okay. All right, when we come back, we'll show you who we see making the playoffs from the SEC. Everybody's going to show you their rankings. Well, I'm not because we don't have time, and I don't want to go on the record. But we'll do that. Come on back on the Sports Order.